Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Goedemiddag en welkom iedereen. Goedemiddag en welkom elkanin. Thanks so much for joining us for this special panel on voice technology for minoritized language. I'm so glad you could join, and I'm really looking forward to jumping in and talking with you today. The panel topic, as you know, is voice technology for minority languages. And if you want to communicate with us, raise a question, make a comment, or interact with the panel in any way, you can go onto Twitter and use hashtag #CVChallenge, or just make a comment in the YouTube comment bar below. And our colleagues will be reading it and relaying those comments back to us. So it'll be really fun to interact with you and make this really a nice discussion, not just between us, but with you, the audience too. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce the panel participants. First, I'd like to have you meet Dr. Esther Klabbers, a research scientist at Reed Speaker. Next, meet Dr. Jelska Dijkstra, a researcher in voice technology at the University of Groningen, and my colleague, and also at the Friska Academy. And finally, Daan van Es, internationalization for language tech at Google. Thanks so much for joining us. And one more person, of course, our special guest, who you'll be meeting later on. But for now, you can say hi to Fat Do, who's a PhD student together at Campus Friesland, University of Groningen, working with myself, Jelska, and Esther. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. And I'm really looking forward to doing this. Whoa, I should also introduce myself. I'm Matt Kohler. I'm an associate professor of language and technology at University of Groningen, and I'm the director of the new voice technology master's program. And if you permit me, maybe I can say a few words about that program while we're here right now, just for a second. It's a one-year interdisciplinary master's program, which is dedicated mainly to researching and developing speech recognition and voice synthesis software. It's really collaborative, it's really interactive, and all backgrounds are welcome. So if you come from a background with AI and computer science, no problem. But also if you come from a background more involved with linguistics, digital humanities, or similar studies, language studies, for example, there's also a place for you here. If you're interested, you should check out our website. There'll be some links appearing below momentarily. There's a video there that you can watch and learn more about the program. And there's also a webinar on February 18th, where you can talk in more detail with instructors and hear how the program works. So check that out if that's of interest to you. And of course, another option is the minor program in conversation design taught at the University of Applied Sciences, Amsterdam. It's a minor in conversational interfaces for speech and chat applications, which may interest other people in this audience. It starts in semester 2 of this year, and there's a URL for you that should appear in a second. So, okay, that's enough of plugs for now. Let's just jump in with some real content and get started. Voice technology for minoritized and under-resourced languages. Before we jump into really discussing the nuts and bolts of that, let's start in figuring out what we mean by voice technology. What is voice tech? And what are some common examples of voice tech in everyday life so our audience can get a clear idea of what we mean? After all, voice tech is used by different people in different ways, and it's nice to get on the same page. Esther, maybe you could crack the ice with that one.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm really excited to be on this panel discussion with you, and thanks for inviting me. So yeah, when you think about voice tech, you already mentioned it. There is automatic speech recognition, or ASR, sometimes also called speech-to-text, or STT. And in that, for that technology, what happens is you speak to a computer, and it interprets what you say, and it translates it to text. And then the opposite is text-to-speech, which is my field of research, where you feed text to a computer and then it reads it out in a synthetic voice. These technologies can work together in a dialogue system. For instance, when you have personal assistants like your Siri phone or your Google Assistant or your Amazon Alexa device, or you can use them separately. For instance, you can use speech recognition for dictation. For instance, in hospitals, doctors use it to make notes instead of having to type. They have their hands free. And for speech synthesis, at Reed Speaker, we use speech synthesis, and we have it on like government websites, so people can have it read out to them, or it's used in education for students who have trouble reading or who thrive with getting audio to listen to, as well as reading the text. And yeah, training all kinds of application areas there. And so, yeah, you already mentioned this too, Matt. You need a wide variety of knowledge to tackle these problems, from phonetics and linguistics to computer science, AI. And a lot of these models, they're computer models, they're trained with neural networks. And in order to create good networks for all kinds of languages, all kinds of situations, you need a lot of data to train these models. And so that's why we're here today.
Super. Yeah, thanks. So let me see if I can summarize it in just like one sentence to give a real takeaway message for the absolute novices who may be in the audience today, right?
Sure.
So on one hand, you have, and correct me, just interrupt me if I'm missing something, right? So on one hand, you have speech recognition, which is how a device, a machine of some kind, understands that it's being spoken to, so that it hears language, it separates language from background sounds, from noises, from music, from the television, etc. So that's one set of technologies. And the other set of tech is the way that that device speaks back to you by producing language.
Right.
So the way the synthetic or artificial voices that those machines use when they speak to you, and taken together, this tool set comprises what we call voice tech, right? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Thanks. That's excellent. Okay, that's a good overview of what voice tech is. But of course, this panel is not just about voice tech in general. It's voice tech in used for minoritized and under-resourced languages. So Don, when we think about that kind of technology, we're not just talking about Alexa or Google Home or those kinds of devices, are we? There's something maybe more profound or more meaningful than just producing an Alexa that works in Frisian, for example. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great topic, minority languages and voice technology. A lot of people don't actually realize that there's more than 7,000 languages in the world today, right? So people kind of look at voice technology and, common speech recognition systems or speech synthesis systems. They might support like 100 languages. Maybe there's overall like, 200, 300 languages for which these technologies are available today. And, you can build tons of useful products on top of these technologies, right? So, you mentioned dictation, Esther, there's speech synthesis for like government websites, also for accessibility purposes, right? A lot of the time people who might have, vision impairments might use the speech synthesis option there. So those are really important technologies for enabling access to information or enabling people to share information, right? When they want to text each other, for example, they might send a message. But then, of course, it is really important that it covers as many people as possible, right? Because if we have a technology that's available only in English, it's not that useful for most people in the world. Even though I speak English, I'm a native speaker of Dutch, I would not text my friends in Dutch, right? And the content that I might consume on my government website would also be in Dutch. So it's really important that you have as many different languages covered. But of course, then with that being, 7,000 languages, this is a huge challenge to make the right models on the right data on these different languages. Part of that is definitely also getting the community involved and getting the data for these languages that doesn't yet exist today, or maybe does exist, but is historically very hard to access, right?
Yeah.
And so these open source sets are very exciting, I think, in terms of bringing us to a level or a place where we can support many more languages in voice technology in the years to come.
I mean, there's a kind of challenge, right? So, of course, the tech that we develop depends a lot on the data that's available, of course. But in some ways, maybe that's not the best way to prioritize, or maybe it's even conflicting way to prioritize which languages need the most technical support, right? Because the ones in most danger probably have no resources or no data sets. The ones whose danger is maybe moderated have some. Is there a way to solve that dilemma with the community, or do you have experience working with that kind of challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a question, right, of where can you have the most impact, right? There's no one in the world, no organization, and even if like all the different players in this field came together, I don't think we have enough knowledge of technology and enough experts to build these models for every single language like right now, right? So I think there's a few ways that you can make this easier. So one is, well, obviously making it easier and faster to build a data set where no data set exists yet. Because as a community, if you can just start yourself by making a data set, then you don't need to wait for some expert to come along and help you, right? Like if there's an easy tool, you can just go set up your data collection. The other thing, and Mozilla has also done a bunch of work on this, as have other players, is also, okay, once the data exists, you should not need to go find somebody who has done like, a PhD and then 6, years of additional research, and then, eventually somebody might be able to train your model, right? It should be really easy and accessible to collect the data and to train the model, using an open source toolkit like, Google's TensorFlow or PyTorch or whatever. And I think, if you kind of bring those things together, then that's a way that you can scale these sorts of technologies more easily, right?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Maybe before switching gears, I can bring in Jelske to this conversation. Jelske, thinking now on our discussion about voice tech for minoritized or under-resourced languages and the challenges therein, maybe you could say something about your work and your research on speech recognition and maybe even voice synthesis for Frisian.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. As you said, I also work at Friska Academy here in Leeuwarden, and here we developed Frisian Dutch speech recognition together with the Center for Language and Speech Technology of the Radboud University in Nijmegen. And it had to be bilingual because we wanted to use it to disclose the radio archive of the Frisian radio broadcaster. And the interviews in that archive, it was an archive of over 50 years of radio recordings. So it's very interesting to disclose it. Before the disclosure, journalists couldn't find fragments, or they had to search very hard to find fragments. And with this multilingual speech recognizer, all the speech is transferred to text, and then that makes it much easier to find the right fragment, the radio fragment. And it's also nice for the public to see whether their grandfather or father is interviewed, is available in the data, or listen to a certain program that dated 20 years ago. And also here at the Friska Academy, we are very enthusiastic about that radio archive because it contains 50 years of spoken Frisian. We don't have anywhere such a large corpus that spans so much time. So we can really focus on language change over that period.
Yeah.
But also at Campus Friesland, we are doing very interesting research on, Vado is doing very interesting research on speech synthesis for Frisian.
Oh, wait, before we do it, Jelske, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because I think you said something that really potentially interesting for the audience. So the kind of research you're describing now at the Friska Academy isn't what we really think of in the first example that Esther gave about synthesis and recognition. Of course, implicitly it is, but for many people listening in right now, that connection might not be obvious. And so it's really cool to show that voice tech is not really just only about making smart devices work in a more, I don't know, different way or for different languages or something, that there's really profound historical and scientific purposes underlying it, right? So what you're describing now is kind of understanding language change over time using a resource which would otherwise be totally unavailable. We all know that, of course, languages change slowly over time, but there's lots of research on how they change, why they change, what that says about history of language contact, about how the mind works, and about all kinds of other really profound and compelling questions in science. And the research that you so elegantly just described, I think, wouldn't be achievable without core knowledge in voice and speech technology. So I think it's really super to highlight. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to make sure that the audience got a good understanding of how compelling what you guys have done there with those archives.
Yeah, we are very glad with that archive, and we're now fine-tuning that speech recognizer to make it into a device that will subtitle the meetings of municipalities and the provincial government, because also there a lot of Frisian is spoken and mixed with Dutch, and this speech recognizer can handle that.
Yeah, that's another great, really wonderful, I think intellectually stimulating point, is that the conventional speech recognizers, as far as we know, the big ones anyway, work for one language, which is super in America, right? Where obviously not exactly so, but in many use cases that are dreamed up of in Silicon Valley, people are speaking English to their devices and they get an English output, fine. But here in Europe, and especially some more multilingual European zones like Friesland, there's a lot of what we call code switching, where people will speak and mix different languages together fluidly, right? So Dutch and Frisian are a great example that they intermingle in everyday speech all the time. And to resolve that, it's not a trivial matter. You have to really understand kind of language change structure underlyingly of both those two languages and the different sounds and melodies that they have when they're used to recognize them adequately. So, and the example you gave again is also, I think, really compelling because it's actually about subtitling government output, which is in a way a great way to increase democratic engagement, right? So again, I want to really highlight how important and profound the research developments in voice tech for minorities languages really is. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
One interesting thought, right, is we were just saying, there's 7,000 languages in the world, right? Like many different languages. If you go look at really any place in the world, right, you think, oh yeah, the Netherlands, they speak Dutch, right? Well, they also speak Frisian and Gronings and Drents and, Limburgs and many other varieties, right? And there's all this tremendous diversity. So, count them all, maybe you end up at 7,000, 8,000, who knows what the real number is. There's a lot of, ambiguity around when is it a real, a difference and so on. But anyway, say that it's thousands, right? It's actually not even that, right? Because you have this sort of code switching and you have this bilingualism, right? So you can't even make a list and say, okay, we're going to collect data in each of these 7,000 languages and then we are going to train the model, right? Because you've got people who speak multiple languages, there might be speakers of Dutch and Frisian who mix that together, but then there might also be speakers who mix, I don't know, Frisian and English together because they grow up in a bilingual family, right? So it really is this very, rich linguistic diversity that you have to deal with when you build voice technology.
Yeah. I teach a course in kind of cultural anthropology at the faculty. And one of the things we talk about there, the students often refer to the internet as the repository of human knowledge. And I say, yeah, but in what language, right? Most of the internet is not in a minority language. Actually, most of the internet is in the big languages, but the small ones are almost totally absent from the internet, even from Wikipedia, right? Which we all think, oh, it's such a wonderful resource of written language. In fact, for the big ones, it's great, but for the smaller ones, it's really, really lacking. So the urgency of this work is not to be underscored. I think those are all really interesting points. But maybe before we go much further, one idea might be to bring on our special guest. Fat Do is joining us today. Fat is a PhD student working with myself, Jelske, and Esther. Fat, maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us what you're going to show us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Matt. My name is Fat Do. I'm from Vietnam, and I'm in the first year of my PhD research at Contribute-a-thon of the University of Groningen. I've also been supporting the organization of this Contribute-a-thon, and I'm very glad for this opportunity to briefly join this panel discussion. I'm working on TTS, or speech synthesis for low resource or minoritized languages in general, and I've chosen Frisian as the focus language of my research. And as such, I'm very happy to play a little demo of the Frisian synthetic voice that I've been working on. I should say first that this was based on an English model and then later fine-tuned on a limited amount of speech data from Frisian audiobooks recorded by the voice actress Kiesje de Vries. And here it goes. I hope you can listen to this.
Boeter, breij en grien het zies. Wat dat net sizze kin is gien op jochte Fries.
And again, maybe.
Boeter, breij en grien het zies. Wat dat net sizze kin is gien op jochte Fries.
Okay, I hope it was clear. I guess this sentence is already very familiar with Frisian speakers, but for the others, it's a popular quote that apparently only Frisian speakers can pronounce correctly. And as you can see or hear, it's nowhere near perfect yet. It's a work in progress. And you might have noticed some issues with the diphthongs and also the prosody, maybe. The thing was, as I said, it was fine-tuned on an English model with a limited amount of Frisian data. And so its characteristics may still be influenced by English. And it will get better later in my research. But the point I'm trying to raise here is that since it was trained on a limited amount of data, we can see that there are a lot of difficulties in building such a tool for minoritized or low resource languages in general, and in this case, Frisian. And that is why Common Voice, projects such as the Common Voice dataset, is really helpful to the research community of speech technology in general. And because of that, if you can, please consider donating your voice to the Common Voice project, for example. And who knows, maybe if you have enough donation recordings in your own voice, maybe someday synthetic voice that is based on your own voice can be available.
Yeah.
So that's what my message, and thank you for this opportunity. Thanks, everyone.
No, before you go. So thanks so much for that demo. I think really cool to hear Frisian spoken in a way at least myself as a foreigner can understand. So it's super to see. Really cool work you did. Maybe you could kind of give a quick overview in really simple terms, just for the audience, about what your PhD research is about. Because it's nice to show the demo, but maybe also nice to kind of give the audience an understanding of the scientific underpinnings of your work and why it's relevant, and maybe how it connects to this panel topic.
Thank
I know
you.
it's a lot to ask to have a PhD student summarize his work in a nutshell, but
well, I will try to. My PhD research project in general is about TTS, or speech synthesis for low resource or minoritized languages in general. And specifically, it is about trying to find a way for such languages to overcome the issue of having not enough data, as has been mentioned here in this panel today. And the particular approach that I'm using for my research is the multilingual one. In other words, I am trying to find the best way to utilize speech data from other languages apart from the target language itself to overcome the issue of having not enough data. For example, for Frisian, it may be a good idea to use its adjacent languages. I mean, languages in the same language family in the West Germanic language family, so Dutch, English, and German. And my research project revolves around that idea, and more particularly about what is the best practices to do such a thing, and what kind of language we should use for that purpose, and how much data is necessary, and so on. It's I hope that at the end it will provide some concrete answer on such approaches, and as such it can be used for not only Frisian but also other minoritized or low resource languages in the world. Super.
So let me in like 5 seconds or less try to summarize that, and maybe even simpler, right? To see if we can get total audience, get everybody on the same page. So what you're saying is that for some minority languages, there's not enough data available, and it's very difficult to learn how to make a synthetic voice for those languages. So what you're doing is exploring how we could use data from other languages to augment a data set to produce realistic voice in a minoritized language. Is that accurate enough, or am I missing something?
Yes, exactly. I could have done it better myself. Thanks.
Good. I just earned my accolades as a supervisor. If I got that wrong, it'll be very awkward. Good. Okay. Thanks, Fat. Before we continue on, maybe it's a good idea to check in with Lucy, who's monitoring questions on the hashtag CV Challenge. If anybody has raised a question yet, Lucy.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, Matt.
Perfectly. Yep.
Great. Yeah, we've had a great question from the audience, so I'll put that to you. Considering all topics we've covered so far, can you say something about how ethics comes into play? What kind of ethical conditions are necessary? Not just informed consent, but more broadly speaking, in terms of community ethics.
Super. Yeah, the ethical issue is a complex one. Can I refer that to Don to put you on the spot? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different aspects of ethics that come into play, right? Like obviously informed consent, the question already referred to, right? But also things like, what are the implications of having the technology and not having the technology, right? Because if you build something, right, let's say you build a speech recognition system, I think it's especially the case maybe for speech recognition systems, right, where there's lots of different voices speaking to the system. But let's say that, you've got like an accent, maybe I have like an accent as a native speaker of Dutch. I use a system that was designed for native speakers of English. It doesn't work great for me, right? Like, what does that do when I'm trying to search for information? Like, how does that sort of change access to information? And, obviously, it generally works fine these days for me. But those sorts of things, right? I think it's not just about the data, where of course all those things like informed consent and everything that Mozilla Common Voice also builds in are super important. But also when you think about these things, it's a broader ethical question of, okay, what does it mean to provide this service? And, when it makes a mistake, right? How can you make sure that that's something people can understand? This is a machine. This is not going to be perfect, right? there's all these sorts of very interesting questions. Like if you're looking at an archive and you want to find stories that contain, references to, I don't know, like the holiday season, maybe you'll search for the word Christmas in like Frisian in the archive that Joost was mentioning. If it doesn't find every single example, maybe that's okay. Maybe you're just looking for like, 10 recordings and you'll find them, right? But if you're using it for like a very business critical purpose, of course, it's going to be quite different in terms of, it needs to be very accurate, right? Like I think Esther mentioned like a medical dictation sort of scenario, right? You want to be very like, sure that what you are doing there is you are getting the important terms right. So I think there's always the kind of question, not just of the data collection, but also like the real world use scenario, right? And like being clear with people that, this is machine learning technology, it makes mistakes, and trying to figure out where it makes them and then trying to improve them. I think that's really a responsibility if you develop these systems. I don't know if there kind of is what you were thinking, or if the other panelists have any other thoughts.
They're quiet so far, so maybe I'll respond, because I have a question about that, maybe towards Jelske as a Frisian speaker. So looking at the Common Voice project, Jelske, of course, we can enter Frisian data in, but Frisian is not just one dialect, right? There's kind of three main components of Frisian. Is there an ethical consideration to be had about merging them into one data set in terms of what we're going to do with kind of a standardized synthetic Frisian, or is that not a concern that you have?
Well, I think it's very important to have that diversity also in the set. For example, for Common Voice, Common Voices, it's like what Jos Meyer said during his talk last week. It's important that that diversity is in the set. And to be honest, I was listening and validating some of the Frisian samples, and I'm very glad that this all three main varieties of Frisian are in the set. So I'm very proud of the community that every variety is in it. However, there are also some other dialects spoken in Friesland that are more mixed varieties between Frisian and Dutch, such as the Bilts language spoken in the north of Friesland. And I think you should add another set for that variety. Because I don't think the set as it is now will be sufficient for building speech recognition tools or speech synthesis tools for builds.
I mean, I think that's such a complex issue, right? So the question you're pointing to is, how do we define where language begins and ends, right? What kind of phenomena are classifiable under Frisian? And of course, there's different definitions. Right now, if somebody was going to speak builds and contributed to the Frisian data set, under the assumption that it was a kind of Frisian, that has kind of some serious consequences, I guess, which maybe are worthy of consideration, not by Common Voice, but in academia, right? How should we manage that when we develop solutions for minoritized languages? I don't have a solution right now, but maybe in the next panel discussion, we can think about how that would look. Maybe now we can switch topic for a second. Esther, I wanted to direct a question towards you. I wanted to ask you about the extent to which voice tech could support, like very concretely, if you could, language diversity further, or maybe you could hinder language diversity in ways we don't want it to. Do you have something that you'd like to add about that? Maybe even referring, if you like, to Fat's PhD research or something else within your expertise.
Let me think for a second. Yeah, it's kind of a complex question, I think.
Read Speaker does have a voice for Frisian, right?
Sorry?
Read Speaker does have a voice for Frisian.
We sell a voice for Frisian, but it was not developed by Read Speaker. And so we're looking into, and that's one of the things. So we built many voices for many different languages, but it's almost always comes from the customer. So if there is a customer who is interested in a Frisian voice, then it takes some considerable effort to develop it ourselves. And one of the main things that people don't really think about is it's not just about collecting audio data from a speaker and then synthesizing it. It's also, when you get input text, how should that be pronounced? And this whole linguistic pre-processing is very language and dialect specific. You have to think about abbreviations, how numbers are pronounced. There are often homographs, so words that are written the same way but pronounced differently depending on the context. And sometimes there are also speaker-specific rules, like a certain speaker pronounces words always this way and another speaker pronounces it another way. And so when you're training your models, you want to try to get the input, what we call the phonetic string, as accurate as possible to get the highest quality models. And so, yeah, if you want to branch out and say, I'm going to create a new language or a new dialect or whatever, you also have to spend time on collecting linguistic information about that language to make sure that you set up that pre-processing step correctly.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really illuminating. That's a good point. Maybe I could switch it back to Dan now and ask, because I know that you have a lot of experience working on a huge diversity of languages at Google, right? I follow you on Twitter, of course, and you have you're responding to people working particularly on like indigenous African languages, sometimes on solutions to help them interact with technology better. Overall, I suppose we can all agree that the effect of voice tech for maybe such languages is positive. Do you agree with that? Have you worked on languages where that was more ethically complex, or have you faced any challenges? Have you been also working on other Dutch languages? I remember we spoke about Groningen also a while back.
Yeah, I think for Groningen there was actually, wasn't it like a PhD student at the University of Groningen? I haven't personally been looking at it, but I think there has been some work. I think, the question of, does voice technology, help language diversity, hinder language diversity? I think it's always like a nuanced question, and it's always both, right? But just a couple of examples to give a bit of a sense of how it can help and maybe hinder, right? I'll give both, and I think both are like, actually you will find those situations in the real world. So where it can help, right, is sometimes people might not be super comfortable reading and writing in their own language. And so then, if they can then use voice technology, well, in their own language, that means that they can find information even if they can't read and write. Maybe there's even machine translation technology, right, where you issue a query in, you ask something in your native language, which maybe doesn't have a lot of content on the web, right? Like there's not a lot of written text, right? But like, a search engine can go and execute a search over like the English language web and find like a relevant page and translate it and speak it back to you, right? So in those sorts of scenarios, you can obviously see the benefit of voice technology where it helps people cross language barriers and get information or communicate. I mean, back when you could still travel, I also have experienced this personally, right? Like you would go somewhere like maybe to Japan or something, and you would just use a voice translator to communicate, right? So I think in that sense, it does help language diversity, right? You can kind of cross those language barriers. But of course, that also means, the inverse is also true. If that technology is not available in your language, well, then maybe you are going to be incentivized to learn another language so that you can communicate, right? And that's something that you see as well. And people adapt the way that they speak. People choose no longer to teach their kids even how to speak their own native language, right? Because they think, well, it'll be better if my kids learn this different language, right? And that's not something that's due to technology alone, right? This happens in societies around the world. That's historically been, the driving factor, I think, behind language endangerment, right? People think, it's better if my kid grows up speaking another language because they will have better jobs, better economic opportunities, and so on. And that's definitely been the case for a long time, way before technology came onto the scene, right? But I do think it makes a difference that it is another consideration, right? And then you do see the opposite again as well, where you work with a community and you show them technology that works in their language, and it's a real point of pride. People are like, wow, I've heard people like literally say to me, now our language is a modern language, right? Like now it has this technology. And that's, in a way it's beautiful to hear, but it's also very sad to hear, right? Because every language is worthy and every language is valuable, right? It's not the case that, oh, now there's technology, now it's a real language, right? Like that's not the case at all, right? Like, so that's always kind of a moment where voice technology can help, but you can also see that it's part of a larger, complex social issue around languages and what people teach each other and so on.
mean, I think that what you're saying is so important because it really points to the interdisciplinary challenges, right? So to resolve this stuff, the solution is not just hire more programmers or something. It's to really involve like sociolinguists, anthropologists, people who have expertise in ethics, alongside computer science people and people who are capable of programming and people sensitive to product development, et cetera. And only through that collaboration, I think, can we really make the positive social impact that you're pointing to. But without sufficient collaboration, there's so many kind of insurmountable challenges. It would be very hard to know where to start. And I think that's why voice tech is such a compelling and exciting field, personally. Okay, I think we're getting a little bit low on time, so I wanted to ask maybe one final question. Jelska, well, we're here, of course, to recognize the accomplishments of the Common Voice initiative. And with that in mind, thinking of our master's program at the University of Groningen in voice technology, do you see a place for the Common Voice dataset, which is, of course, freely available for research by students? Is there some way that you think we could integrate that into the program? Do you have something in mind for that?
Yes, definitely. I will teach the Introduction to Voice Technology course, where we also look at different data sets and where you can find data sets. And of course, Common Voice, we will point the students to Common Voice, but it's not only in that course where we can incorporate Common Voices, but we can also use it during the speech recognition and speech synthesis classes, because students will build their own voices and recognizes, and Common Voices offer so many languages and so many data sets, and we will really encourage them to use those data sets.
Yeah, great. So it seems like this is definitely, for our university anyway, I agree with what you just said, by the way. I think it's all great points. We can definitely use this data set, not just the Frisian one, but well, basically many of them. And maybe we could even think of ways for the students to grow the existing ones and possibly even new ones. There is still space for Gronings, maybe for builds and so on. Maybe we'll talk to Mozilla after this and see what we can do together. Okay, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, maybe you can do a round and just hear what you guys are working on to get to know your projects a bit more. If you want to share something, what kind of topics you guys work on to give the audience a better idea of what a day in the life of a voice tech expert is like. Let's start with you, Esther, if that's okay.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, so I work on a day-to-day basis in speech synthesis and developing new voices for our neural net synthesizers. My main focus is on prosody, trying to make the speech sound as natural as possible and expressive. And currently I'm working together with Fat as a Frisian TTS as a supervisor. But we also have our own PhD student who just started at Reed Speaker for the European COBRA project. It's called Conversational Brains. And the idea there is to look at text-to-speech in a conversational setting and what is required to get it to sound more natural, because most of our voices currently, they were recorded with read speech because they were mostly used on websites to read the text. Excuse me. And yeah, it requires a whole different speaking style and different kind of text messages when you're conversing with a computer or with a human. So yeah, that's kind of what we're researching right now, is what kind of material should you record when you're building a conversational voice, and how can you model the natural prosody of the messages, and how could you possibly control it as well, so that your system could say, oh, I really want to ask this question, but I also want to make sure that this information in my question is most important.
Yeah, that's right. I think this prosody topic is so compelling. And just for the audience who maybe isn't aware, prosody is kind of the rhythm or the melody of speech through which we convey or emphasize or express sarcasm or mood, and all of the richness of voice is in prosody. And you can feel what it's like to not have a prosodic voice if you listen to, Siri or or Google read an email, right? So the first few sentences, it sounds nice. Yeah, it's okay. But if it reads a full book in that voice, you'll just go crazy, right? It's not realistic enough. There's not the pausing to take a breath, like in human language. There's not the hesitation. There's not the nuance that really textures language. And so this work that you guys are doing at ReadSpeaker sounds really exciting and compelling, partially because Prosody encodes so much knowledge about content, right? It's not just
absolutely
sounds, but the rhythm, the melody that makes speech what it is.
Yeah, and as you were saying, if you're reading an email or like a news article, many text-to-speech systems don't even put in extra phrase breaks. So if there's no comma in the sentence, you could have really long sentences, and it sounds so boring. It just drones on and on and on. So trying to deal with all these different types of applications and making it sound more exciting for people so that they will actually listen for a longer period of time is really interesting stuff.
Even just for plain old processing, right? You cannot keep track of a sentence without enough pauses to kind of process chunks, right? And if there's no chunks.
Exactly, and it has a huge influence on the prosody. So if you put in more phrase breaks, it means you like you said, you chunk your utterance into smaller segments, but you do things with your voice to indicate these phrase breaks. You go up in pitch, you lengthen the end of the word, and then you take a breath or a pause, and then you continue. So it all contributes to the overall melody and timing of your utterance, which helps processing the message when you're listening to it.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Esther. Can I flip the same question over to Dan now?
Yeah, sure. There's always tons of projects going on, but the two that I'll highlight. So one is, there's a very interesting problem, which is not exactly something we've talked about, speech recognition, where we recognize speech and write it down, or speech synthesis, right, where we take some text and generate, audio. Another related problem is determining what language is present in a given piece of text or in a given piece of audio, right? So let's say that you look at the United Nations, people are speaking tons of different languages, and, having a system automatically determine, oh, this person is speaking Russian and this person is speaking Hindi now, and maybe even the same person switches from English to Hindi and so on. So there are systems that can detect what the name of the language is, right? That somebody is speaking. They can say, oh, this here is Frisian, this here is Spanish, but they usually only support like 100 languages. And so we are trying to find out if we can make systems that can, determine, this is like one of this is maybe like Bilt's, or this is Gronings. Because that's also really important when you want to respond back to somebody, right? And even when you look at the internet, right, you were just saying there's not a lot of content in a lot of those languages. It's definitely true. Most of the internet is in English, Spanish, Hindi, Russian, and so on. But the beauty of the internet is that people are also starting their own websites in their own languages and posting videos, posting stories. And actually, if you go out and look, we just did this for text. And we found text in more than 1,000 languages online. And that's just the ones we could find, relatively straightforwardly. So that's the sort of thing that we are looking at to get a better sense of the diversity, and also to build it into an application so that you can speak any language and it responds in the language you just spoke to. Another thing is that we are working with some universities in Australia mostly, but now also in Paris and some other places, on having a nice graphical user interface tool. So, just with buttons and animations and everything to train speech models. Because today you can collect the data pretty nicely on Mozilla Common Voice and other platforms. It's pretty straightforward. But then if you want to train something, you've got to open the command line terminal, and you've got to run all these commands, and it's got all these bizarre error messages that you read even as a programmer, you have no idea what they mean. You're going to spend the rest of your week, doing search queries to figure out what this bizarre error means, right? And that really should no longer be the case, right? Voice technology is mature enough now that given a data set, you should be able to train that thing, just like you don't need a PhD to operate Microsoft Word or any other sort of software, right? You should be able to just open the software, take your data set, put it in there, click, I want to train a speech recognition model, and it should go off and train it for you, and then give you something to run it with, right? And that's not quite where it is, but that's something I'm excited about because it will help democratize the technology even further.
Yeah, exactly. That was the first thing I thought of, as you were saying. It's a way to promote greater access for community-led initiatives, which is kind of the bread and butter of a voice tech for minoritized languages or for under-resourced languages. Wow, super, really exciting. I'd love to hear more about it when we have time. But I'll give the final word here right now before we switch gears to Jelska. What's going on in your world in terms of voice tech development?
At the Frieske Academy, we are currently working, fine-tuning our Frisian Dutch speech recognizer, and we will do that together with, we are doing that together with the Center of Language and Speech Technology of Radboud University and Humaner, a speech tech company here in Friesland. And we will use that speech recognizer to provide captions or subtitles for the live streams of meetings of municipalities and provincial governments. And it's very exciting to do this because, it really discloses those meetings for people who are deaf or have hearing problems.
Yeah. Oh, that's really exciting, Jaska. Thanks. Excellent. Yeah, well, maybe now's a good time to wrap it up. I want to thank you guys. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm just looking at the time and I see we're going a little bit over. That's a critique of how interesting it was. So I wish we could talk more. Thanks, you guys, for joining us. Also, Fat for the demo. That was really fun. Thanks to the audience for their questions and for their engagement too. But now I know you're not here only to see this panel, but you're waiting to hear the outcomes of the Contribute-a-thon. So we have some results for you. And if there was a sound effect of a drum roll, I would play it now. There's not. May I share my screen just for 1 second, just to show where we're at? Maybe, or not. I'll just explain it in words otherwise. Well, also spoiler alert, the Frisians really delivered on the Contribute-a-thon. We have a really nice showing both in terms of new speech segments. We really overperformed our expectations. So there's a total of nearly 10,000 new clips for Frisian. Dutch, very modestly, with its 4,600, it's not too bad. But considering that Frisians are 3% of the population and most of the rest of it are Dutch, although not entirely, that's pretty remarkable. The Frisians are a dedicated group of real believers in the value of voice technology and of language preservation and of documentation and of open access and all these good values that we believe in. So great. That was just those 9,600, almost 10,000 daily clips are for spoken Frisian. There's also been a lot of validation. So people also go to Common Voice's website and listen to clips and make sure that the people are reading them correctly or that the mic was on and there's no technical problems with it. So for Frisian, there was 4,400 plus validations. For Dutch, 2,300 plus. That means the Frisians are the winners. So congrats to Friesland. But of course, that's not possible without you individual contributors, you, the audience. If you were a top contributor on the leaderboard for the Common Voice project, send an email to the email address that should appear on your screen now. In case it doesn't, it's commonvoicechallenge@gmail.com, commonvoicechallenge, one word, @gmail.com, with a screenshot of the stats tab with your username there, and we'll get a prize out to you. There's some nice Mozilla swag and some other cool stuff that you can get. So just send an email out and you'll hear from us soon. But now I want to give the mic to Tammy, who's going to talk a little bit about MozFest and a follow-up hackathon. Tammy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. My name is Tammy. I lead Mozilla's developer-focused strategy around trustworthy AI and the Mozilla Festival. So the Mozilla Festival, or MozFest, as we call it, starts March 8th this year. For those who don't know, MozFest is a unique hybrid that brings together artists, technologists, activists, and more in diverse global movements fighting for a more humane digital world. Amsterdam will be MozFest's home for the next 3 years, so we would really love it if that community was represented. If there weren't already enough reasons to come to MozFest, we are inviting you to participate in the Trustworthy AI Hackathon, where you can use the voice data we've collected this week, along with our community, to build better voice technology. We hope to see you at the first ever virtual MozFest running March 8th through 19th. And this year, for the first time ever, the cost of tickets are donation-based. So that means that you can pay what you can for the ticket. And if you secure your early bird ticket by January 31st, you'll receive exclusive first access to early registration for our limited capacity sessions. So we encourage you to secure your early bird ticket today at mozillafestival.org. And if you want to participate in the hackathon I spoke about, we ask that you sign up with the link we shared on our YouTube, and the hackathon registration link will automatically grant you access to the Mozilla Festival. So congratulations everyone on your participation this week, and we hope to see you at MozFest 2021. Back to you, Matt.
Super, Tammy. Thanks a lot for that. It sounds really exciting, and I'm sure you'll get lots of response to that. That's great. So just to wrap up then, well, once again, thanks to the panelists and you, the audience, for being here. A special thank you for Fat, who we met earlier with the demo, not only for that very cool demo, but all of the behind the scenes organization. That really brought this together for the faculty at Campus Friesland, and we are very grateful for that. Thanks also to Lucy Click, who managed the Q&A and tech support, Andy for really helping out with the key areas of getting us up and running on Zoom today, and Alex for your real-time transcription. I can't see it, but I suppose it's excellent. Thanks a lot for that. Above all, thanks Mozilla for being involved in this event, for rekindling the interest in the Common Voice Frisian and also Common Voice Dutch, and for being a part of this program. We're really excited to work together on this project and hope to have a continued relationship as we launch the master's program. Once again, congratulations to the winners. You guys are super, and you guys are what made it happen. So those of you who contributed, big numbers, small numbers, and medium-sized numbers of validated clips and of your own voice towards an open access data set for development of voice technology. We couldn't have done it without you. So that's super. You guys really are playing a big role here. Thanks a lot for that. And be sure again to send an email if you made a big contribution, because you will get a prize. But of course, this discussion is not over yet. We're going to continue talking about this stuff. We're going to continue thinking about voice tech and building voice tech tools and platforms. And if you're interested in that, and if you're thinking of getting a graduate degree or of studying further or getting a second graduate degree or getting some professional, moving up professionally, check out our program. It's 1 year long program, really intense, really, I think, fun and hands-on. I won't pitch it too much now, but just join our info day on February 18th. A link should appear on the screen, or maybe two links, one for our general website where you can see a video about the voice tech program, and one for upcoming events relating to this opportunity to join in the webinar where you learn more about the program. That's about all I wanted to say, unless there's some questions from the chat, which we can take into consideration. But if not, I suggest we just wrap up and call it a day. It's been super. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks.